Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. Research shows that over the last 2 decades, divorced men have been growing more conservative in their political views. And new polling shows that 56% of this cohort supports former President Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election, a greater percentage than their single and married counterparts. Joining us now to explain why this demographic is feeling this way is Ralph Brewer. He is the founder of Help for Men. Ralph, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about Help for Men. You are the founder of this group. When did you start it, and what made you start this site and this community?
Well, years ago, approximately 12 years ago, I went through a divorce, and I ended up with majority custody of my children for several years. And I wrote about my experience, and I blogged about it, and I created some content over it. And I created a lot of different content, including books on a variety of different subjects, including sex and marriage and divorce and dating after divorce. And I got a lot of eyeballs on my material, so to speak, and my content. And I decided to create, not too long ago, a brand that was more inclusive and a private members group. We have articles and videos, and we call that Help for Men. And we have a private community that is very, very active. We get together for discussions. We have live Zoom meetings. We get together in person for conferences. We're having our 5th annual conference next year in South Carolina. So it's very, very busy. And it's the plight of the divorced man, if you will, is something that I know personally very, very well.
The plight of the divorced man. And I feel like in my circles, we talk about the plight of women or divorced women. But just for context, how many divorced men do you think you talk to on an annual basis?
Oh, I would say thousands. We have within our group hundreds, but it's through my content and via messages that I get directly from men. It's definitely in the thousands for sure.
And are they geographically centered anywhere, or is it widespread across the U.S.?
It's widespread across the world, mostly US. Our number 2 market is Australia and everywhere in between.
Interesting. So we have some Aussie perspectives, but I'm curious, what is the biggest thing that you think the media or the general public doesn't understand about divorced men and their feelings about their state of being divorced?
There is most definitely a theme of feeling like we're ostracized, left out. A lot of our personal feelings don't really matter. If I would have to say, if there's a generalized theme towards, it falls in line with a lot of stuff that men endure along these lines, a lot of emotional trauma. The general theme from society overall is one of, just kind of man up, deal with it. Bad things happen. And corollary to that is we often see with the women that we have divorced from, what we see, at least this is our perspective, is one of the message that they receive is more of a kind of a you go girl, this is your chance to kind of be reborn. And, you don't need that man anyway. Well, a lot of men will report when enduring something like a divorce and going through the trauma, they really don't hear much from their social circle at all. They kind of are just left alone. And that's not necessarily an anti-male thing. I think it's a lot of their social circle doesn't quite know how to approach the man. They don't feel comfortable doing so. A lot of men aren't as social as women, so we don't have that much of a close social circle. So it's like this vicious circle, if you will, of kind of loneliness, and we kind of feel forgotten.
That loneliness really resonates right now in a post-pandemic environment. And I remember seeing reports at the height of the pandemic about how men often gather in basketball games or in group activities. And it's in the group activity that you share what's happening in your life and how you feel about it. But when we all had to separate for COVID and stay, in our own bubbles, if you will, it was easier for women to stay connected than it was for men. I'm speaking very generally. How have you found sentiment within your community changing over the years? Has loneliness gotten worse, and has that feeling of maybe being ostracized gotten worse between 2019 and 2020, 2021, 2022 up till now?
Well, from my own anecdotal experience, I would say no, simply because I've created a community solely for that purpose of keeping men together. And we communicate 99% of the time online. So during COVID time, we were very busy with Zoom meetings. We have several live Zoom meetings every single week. Our discussion groups were very lively and very active. So this was actually a good time for men to be, I guess, staying put in their home. A lot of people, working from home as opposed to commuting 2 hours a day or whatever it is. And they had more time to sit and take in meetings and share their thoughts. So actually, we were more connected during that time. But that's our little group. I don't know if that's necessarily society as a whole. I can certainly see how men and women both felt very lonely during the pandemic times, for sure.
Well, I ask because obviously there was an election during the pandemic in 2020, and we're in another election year. And I started this conversation with that fact that 56% of divorced men are supporting former President Donald Trump in this presidential election. So I want to start with a pretty basic question here. Does that fact surprise you? Does that statistic surprise you?
Not at all. I consider myself a pretty centrist guy. I was raised in a very leftist family, very centrist views. I'm one of those rare people that, when somebody says, what do you feel about this? It varies issue to issue. I really don't feel like, I was dealt a certain hand of cards and I have to play those cards. And because I'm a Democrat, this is what I feel. I'm one of those types that takes it issue to issue. But from what I found, I'm kind of a rarity in my world. Most of my world skews definitely to the right, very conservative. And I actually asked one of our guys in a group, why do you think that is? Why do you think our group, which, let's be honest, it is basically, if we had to categorize our group, it is men with relationship problems. So when I see most men in our group who have relationship problems tend to skew conservative, the knee-jerk thought is conservative men tend to have more relationship problems. And they say, no, it's actually because we more faithful, we take our vows very, very seriously, and we want to work for what they see as a very, very important institution of marriage. A lot of our men in our group are not divorced. They're still trying to keep their marriage together, but it's disintegrating, it's falling apart. A lot of men in sexless marriages and so forth. So their claim is that they're actually working harder than the other guys are on the relationship. Whether that's true or not, and that's up for debate. But that's their thinking anyway. So yeah, we see a lot of conservative men.
So from your experience, do their conservative views have more to do with their upbringing and where they live and where they work and general economic theory, or is their support for former President Donald Trump tied to the fact that they're having relationship problems and or are divorced?
Very good question. I would say the majority, it's part of their culture already, pre-divorce. We have a lot of men from the Southeast United States, for example. So a lot of them skew conservative by virtue of their culture. But there is definitely, very good point, there is a subset of the men who probably skewed very liberal, very leftist. And then the trauma of divorce, and it could be argued, it's very interesting to explore why this happened, made them skew way more right as a result. So I've seen the most Bernie Sanders leftist type suddenly become very Andrew Tate-ish post-divorce. It's kind of interesting watching some of these guys morph. And then eventually they come back to center. It's the pendulum swing, definitely, of the trauma and everything that they experience makes them swing all over in that direction.
I was just about to ask if there was a recalibration back to the center for some of that, because I can understand how going through a traumatic event can change the way you view the world, but hopefully the trauma does not last in perpetuity.
Yes, I've seen most men do come more to center and less extreme views, for sure.
What else are you hearing from your community as it relates to the presidential election? Is it pretty, again, you represent a large percentage of the country. You're reaching large swaths of the country. Do you feel like it's 56% of your group is pro-Trump and then the other 44% is pro-Harris? Or what's your sense of the breakdown there?
I would actually think, without formally polling them, I would think 56 is probably a, no pun intended, a conservative number. I would think it'd be higher. Just based on the feedback and the chatter that I see in groups, we do make a point of keeping politics out of it. But even then, you can see certain viewpoints and culture kind of seeps through the surface, and it's mostly conservative in nature.
So if politics are kept out of it, I understand, but policies, are you getting a sense of what they care about the most? Are they talking about alimony? Are they talking about child support? Are they talking about specific policies they want to see from either candidate?
I don't think I hear it in terms of we need to change certain policies. I hear a lot of, basically belly aching about what they see as some inadequacies or disparities in a lot of the systems. I don't hear much in terms of, less these days than what I used to, in terms of unfairness in like the family court system, for example. I don't hear much in terms of wives are getting more in terms of custody and all this alimony and stuff. We know a very small percentage of divorces end in alimony. I think it's less than 10%, if I remember correctly. And as far as child support, we have more and more states defaulting to 50-50, unless there's some kind of extenuating circumstance. The majority of men that I talk to have 50-50 custody of their children, and they see no problem with that. We do have the occasional really terrible situation of, maybe the ex-wife has substance abuse problems or, abandon the family or something like that. And then the men get primary, if not, or majority custody of the children. So most of the men I see, I definitely do not see the stereotype, if you will, of the deadbeat dad. That's just very foreign to me. I've run into a couple of men who want to escape due to the trauma and the chaos of the situation of the divorce. They just want to run away. And we talk through how that's not a good thing for the family, for the children specifically. But that's really, really rare.
So when you say they're looking for some systemic change, what do you think is the biggest change that the men you talk to want to see?
I would say it's more cultural. I don't think we think in terms of specific policies. That's not what I hear anyway. And I think the cultural thing lends itself very much to the Trump side of things. I think the Trump campaign in particular has done a masterful job. And we could argue whether that's a good or bad thing, but still politically, they've done a masterful job of tapping into the cultural aspects of a lot of this and have really touched a nerve with a lot of men that I think they felt neglected in a lot of ways.
They had felt neglected, but do you think they feel seen by Trump and his running mate?
Yes, I think so. That's how I see it anyway. Mm-hmm.
Earlier this summer, we also saw reports that some lawmakers in certain red states like Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma wanted to try to limit no-fault divorce, which is to say to make it harder to file for divorce based on irreconcilable differences. Has this subject come up within your community at all?
Absolutely. I attract to me, based upon my material that I've put out in books I've written and so forth, a subset of men who experienced some really not so good things, such as wife committing repeat infidelities and, like I mentioned before, leaving the family, substance abuse and so forth. And they will find that the courts really don't take into account any of that when looking at things such as, do the children go to mom half the time? Well, they shouldn't, because mother has done these bad things. And should mother receive certain, alimony and child supports? In their mind, the man said, well, she shouldn't because she's done these bad things. And most of the time the law says that really doesn't matter. She's done bad things in your mind, sir. Legally she's entitled to certain funds and so forth. Some states I've learned, I did an interview with an attorney from North Carolina here not too long ago who said, in her state, for example, things such as alimony do dictate whether or not they get, infidelity does dictate whether or not they get alimony, for example. A lot of men hear that and say, amen, we want to see more of that. So that kind of goes against the no fault thing. And I think that's what men want to see more of.
Interesting. So effectively, if I'm summarizing correctly, seeing consequences for action. It's more about that than eliminating the ability to file for irreconcilable differences.
Correct. Yes.
Interesting, because I was going to ask if it's cutting off the nose to spite the face to campaign for a policy like that. Does that create debate within your community, or they're really seeing the issues of infidelity and other issues that just aren't taken seriously by the courts?
Well, talking about is there debate? In my world, internet-based discussion world, it's what I call the vocal minority is the one you hear from most. So most marriages and divorces do not end in such chaos and drama, such as mother doing all the things I talked about and yada yada and trying to take him for all he's worth and everything. But those are the ones we hear from the most. So if you ask me, do I hear a debate, so to speak? No, it's pretty one-sided. The people I hear from are those men that are really hurt from these very chaotic, troubled situations, and they're lashing out, basically.
I know you said you're a centrist, so I expect you'll have a down-the-middle answer for this, but between the two presidential candidates we have in November, who do you think is the better candidate for divorced people? Based on the policies you've heard, based on the discussion around both of these candidates, do you see one as being better than the other for the part of America that has gone through a divorce?
When it comes specifically to policies related to divorce and what we think of as fairness and so forth, I honestly have not heard from either side a good case for, hey, divorced people, not necessarily divorced men, hey, divorced people, here are some laws specifically that we think will help you, I guess, going forward in life. I've not heard that. If that's out there, that has certainly not been promoted nearly enough. So I have to plead ignorance of saying I don't know either way, and either candidate has addressed that sufficiently, not in my mind. Maybe I need to open my ears more, or maybe I need to look at policy, but I've not seen it. And I think the majority of men would probably agree with me. Like, I don't know where they stand, to be quite honest with you.
Do you think it should be a greater part of the conversation in this presidential election cycle?
Well, politics being what it is, it's not necessarily what may benefit the society as a whole, but what will get more votes and more airtime. And if the left, sees more men of a certain ilk, if you will, going towards Trump, and they want to pull them back, then yes, I think it would benefit the Harris-Walz campaign to be more aggressive and open about those sort of topics. Men, we hear you. Joe Sixpack, we hear you. We're not ignoring you. Some of your issues, such as divorce and no fault and all these other things, we hear you, and here's what we think about it. I think that will get some guys to take notice for sure.
It's interesting because we have in Donald Trump a man who has been through divorce, and we also have in Doug Emhoff, our second gentleman right now, another man who's gone for divorce, and yet the issues of divorced men or divorced people are not part of the conversation. What do you make of the relative silence?
Oh, it's one of those verboten, forbidden topics, isn't it? Divorce. I've learned over the years, just talking about it just upsets a lot of people. We have men in our group, for example, that are very, very staunch proponents of marriage. They believe it as an institution. A lot of men very religious. And the mere suggestion of it's an option to leave wife is abhorrent to them. They don't want to hear it. They're just, no. Even if in issues of abuse and all these other infidelity and everything, no, we will work it out. So I can see politically why let's steer away from an issue that is such a huge turnoff to a big part of the country. I can certainly see why it's not front and center issue. Does it affect the majority of us? I don't think so. So I can see a lot of reasons why they may want to steer away from it.
It makes sense, but it's not a 0% of the population, and nor is it a 0% of either party that's running right now. But I guess to go back to something you said about you hear more of the cultural arguments versus the policy arguments within the community that you oversee, I'm wondering, is there an aspect of the conversation around masculinity, both toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity? We've heard a lot about that this election cycle. Is there an aspect of that you would like to see talked about differently based on the conversation you're having within your community?
I think that the left has really dropped the ball on masculinity and how it can be a positive thing, how it is a positive thing, and how society has benefited from it. It is very simple to take what you may call as toxic masculinity, the negative aspects of something, in this particular case, masculinity, men over history, the bad things that they have done. I mean, I've been one to say, let's just put out the facts. Men commit the majority of violent crime, murder, rape. It's terrible things. Follow that up with, that is a very, very small percentage of men overall that commit such acts. The vast majority of men haven't even conceived of such a thing. Yet, many of us can attest to the fact that over the years, since being a young boy, it's been hammered into my head, you're kind of a dangerous creature. You need to kind of, simmer down a little bit. You need to rein in your natural, very negative, violent impulses as a man. When that is, when you hear that campaign over and over again of toxic masculinity, you need to keep it restrained, and we need to, you are potentially a harmful thing for society overall. When that message gets embedded into you after a while, you begin to feel shame, and you begin to feel all kinds of negative emotion over it, and there's going to be inevitably pushback and fight against it. And I think that really opens the door to somebody who is arguably hyper masculine to an unhealthy degree, such as a Trump type of figure, an Andrew Tate type of figure, to really appeal to those men that feel ostracized and shamed, and I'm bad for just being a man. And then here comes somebody saying, not so fast. You're actually good for being a man. You're actually better for being a man. And then combine that with, who's at fault for all of your problems? It's them over there. There's always a them. And in our world, the them is women. And the women are to blame for all your, yeah, darn right they are. And then there goes the fervor. And I think, yes, those men in that world, for the online world, we talk about those men are in the red pill space. And if you're familiar with this, yes, I'm going to guess that 99% of men in that world probably vote for Trump. Simply because he's done, like I say, a masterful job of saying, hey guys, I'm one of you. I saw the other day where Trump went to like a UFC event, for example, the Ultimate Fighting. And UFC audience is what? 99.9% male. And it's probably the most hyper masculine thing there is. And there he was in the audience, in the arena, saying, here I am, I'm one of you guys. And they're like, yay, he's one of us. We've never seen that from a presidential figure before. They would steer clear of such a quote unquote low class thing, hyper masculine thing. But he's like, I'm one of you guys to the nth degree. And that is very, very attractive to a lot of men. And yes, the follow up to that is, so are the men willing to set aside, certain policies and things that may benefit them, economic policies and so forth, just because somebody appeals to them culturally? Yeah, that's politics. We've seen that again and again.
As you talk about the tribalistic aspect of this and the hypermasculinity, I do understand how it can happen, but I have also heard feminist figures like Gloria Steinem talk about how abolishing gender stereotypes would help us all. We talk about how men can be as nurturing as women, and that could be an empowering message for men, especially men who have caregiving responsibilities. Some of the men in my family have been tremendous caregivers, right? So do you think emphasizing the caregiving or the nurturing side of men could reach the men that have taken the red pill? And is there a way to lower the temperature, or are we stuck in us versus them?
Is there a way to lower the temperature is a perfect way of putting it. I don't know. It's one of those, is the cat already out of the bag type of thing and it's too late to put it back in? Is it to say, to emphasize certain nurturing aspects, maybe look at it from the other way, which is, don't demonize such aspects. And yes, some men feel flat out emasculated and put down by their social circle for being, for example, a stay-at-home father. That's a growing population of stay-at-home fathers. And we know, for example, I posted this the other day, got a lot of feedback. Stay-at-home fathers are far more likely, for example, to commit infidelity than men that have a regular career. And we're like, what the heck is going on there? Well, they have more time potentially and so forth. But when you talk to these men, a lot of these men say, I felt emasculated. I felt less than. And this is kind of a toxic way, if you will, of reclaiming my masculinity. I'm worth something. I'm an independent creature. I'm a man, darn it, and goes out and has affairs. Now, the thought may be that, well, some feminist types may come back and say, well, that's an artifact of like a patriarchal system, of a misogynistic system at baseline, that we punish men for being more soft and feminine in nature, for lack of a better term. But what a lot of those men will say is, if that's the case, then why am I getting more negative feedback from the women in my lives than I am from the men? It seems like I'm kind of punished in a way by a lot of the women in my circles who look down upon me for being more nurturing, more caring, more feminine, if you will. And so it's a very mixed message. And it could be also argued that those women that are demonizing him for that, or treating them poorly for that, or what, internalizing like a patriarchal system, if you will. So it's a very interesting subject for sure.
Internalized misogyny is incredibly difficult to unpack. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about paternity leave. We've covered here at Forbes how more companies are offering paternity leave, but men aren't necessarily taking that leave. And again, that is in part because of culture and society and feeling like, okay, I have this opportunity to take leave, but I will be judged if I take it. And I think a lot of us would say that's problematic, because I think men want to bond with their children as much as women do, at least the sources I've interviewed.
Yes, and my family is from Europe, from Spain. My mother's from Spain. And so I know the European way of life, and something like paternity leave over there in many parts of Europe is just a given. And they give you a pretty good amount of time as well. And it's not looked down upon. Men don't necessarily feel, it's just part ingrained and part of their culture. And America, not so much, and as we've seen. And the question is why? Is it cultural? Is it something just inborn in us as men that we want to go out and do things and create and build, and staying home with a little rug rat is taken away from that? I think it's a combination of all those things.
It's very complicated, but thank you so much for coming on to break down what you're seeing from your community. And just before I let you go, any final words? Is there anything else the Forbes audience or the public at large should understand about divorced men and what they feel as we enter the last month of this presidential election cycle?
I would say one very simple piece of advice for everyone. Everyone seems to know somebody, some guy who's going through a divorce. Do not automatically assume that he's Mr. Bad Guy. Don't assume that he's some negative, patriarchal, misogynistic monster that caused all of this. Here is one little note that I will leave you with. Pick up the phone, text or call the guy, and just say, "How are you doing? I've been thinking about you. You doing okay? Do you need anything? Anything I can help you with?" Nobody hears that. No man hears that at all. And I'm not saying that's an anti-man thing. It's more of a cultural thing. Like you say, it's a very complicated thing. But regardless, take the step of just saying, "How you doing, buddy? You doing all right? Anything I can do for you? Want to hang out?" That's huge. And no man hears that. It's beneficial for their mental health big time.
Indeed it is. Ralph Brewer, founder of Help for Men. Thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.